And yes, we are. Okay. It'll be posted to the academic business area of our community. It should be posted probably later this week. I'm hoping Wednesday or Thursday. And you should be able to access it and review it again if you'd like. And that's in the academic business area of the community. Let's see, we hope you enjoy this webinar and find it interesting. Before we start, I want to take a moment to ensure that everybody's ready and familiar with the webinar control panel up on the right side of your computer. You should find a control panel on the right side with an arrow. Basically, there's a red arrow that you can click on to minimize that control panel, and you can then enlarge or bring back the control panel by clicking on that arrow to bring it back as well. And let's see, when I did that, it did something here. And let's just get us back to where we were. There we go. You just try that out and make sure that that's working for you. There's going to be a question area, a question box that you can put something in or type in questions or answer questions. This is a pretty interactive webinar. You'll have a chance to respond to questions and ask questions along the way. Let's see, we've allowed about an hour for this webinar. We may go over a few minutes, but we'll generally try to keep it to around an hour. I know there are going to be a lot of questions throughout the webinar, and you can type those in the question box at any time you want. Basically, I'll be monitoring the questions, and at various points we're going to try to answer some of them. If you want to just try it out, try out the question box, why don't you type in your name and where you're from, and I can make sure that I'm not just talking to myself here. I see someone is already posted. Let me give everybody a moment, make sure you know how to use that question box. Oh yes, okay. It looks like everybody's familiar with how to put in a question. So it looks like we have people from all over. Let's see, Georgia, Texas, Mississippi, Nevada, Pennsylvania. Let's see, where else here? So it looks like we have quite a good group. There's about 42 students right now. We'll probably have a few additions as we go through the webinar. So don't get upset if I don't, point out your question or your answer right away. There's a lot of you here, so we'll try to do the best we can as far as those questions are concerned. All right, so I'm going to turn this over here. Today's presenter is Devi Vallabhanani. I'm sorry, I always get that wrong.
It's all good.
Okay. She has an MBA from the Harvard Business School and received her undergraduate degree from the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. Devi currently serves on the admission board for the Harvard Business School for outreach and evaluation of candidates worldwide. She's among other things is the author of our Introduction to Business course here at Penn Foster, and that's in just about all our business programs. Feel free to ask questions, as I said, and I'm going to turn it over to Devi now and let her begin her presentation, and I'll stop talking. So Devi, take it away.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Russell, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy evening to join us today. Our goal is to bring a lot of concepts that you're learning in class to life through kind of real-world examples and real companies that we're all familiar with. So the Gap, the clothing company, is I would say majority of people have probably heard of, if not been customers. So we're going to dig a little deeper into the Gap and some of their challenges that they face. But really today is about kind of a discussion. I want you to share your experiences and your opinions and your thoughts with us. That's the only way that kind of that we can all learn from each other. What one person's experience can totally, help another person learn a concept. So all of our previous webinars, people have been very engaging and contributing quite a bit in terms of their opinions and whatnot. So I'm totally excited for our time today. Just as a forewarning, I will talk fast. There's a lot to cover today. So just, but like I said, that's why the comment box is there. Feel free to, if you have a question, and we can pause and take those questions. So we'll be pausing quite a bit to make sure that we address any questions or comments that come up. So today's discussion is about the Gap. We're going to be talking about the company background, what is the Gap's biggest threat, and then kind of where do they go from here in terms of maybe you guys can come up with some recommendations of what they need to do based on kind of your experience as a consumer and as and an observer of the apparel industry. So with that said, Russell, why don't we jump into our first discussion point. So the history. In 1969, so about 47 years ago, this couple named, so they're the Fishers, Don and Doris Fisher. They opened up the first Gap store in San Francisco to sell Levi's jeans and LPs. So LPs, for those of you who may not know, are records, like in terms of the big old records. So they did literally like a music and jean shop back in the day. So for all those years later, now the Gap is $15 billion in sales, probably about 16, in 2016, 16 billion. So in all that time, they've been, a good, a very successful company. So with that said, so imagine in terms of here's this, did they know that it was going to be this big? No, not at all. I think in terms of it's probably one of those stories of it's one step at a time, growth led to more ideas led to more ideas and whatnot. So think of what just one couple did in terms of they just followed their passion. And the story goes, they started this because they couldn't find jeans that fit them. So what they did is we thought, okay, well, why not stock our own jeans and test them out? And then this way, people can be can come to us for jeans. So it literally started as a kind of a passion project, not to like rule the world or anything like that. And to think that now it's $16 billion, it's very admirable in terms of kind of how they got started, and you just never know in terms of how entrepreneurs start and kind of where their lives go. So, but before we move on, any kind of, a little trivia question here. What do you think the Gap refers to?
Okay, I don't see anything so far.
We'll give it a minute. It's actually, so remember, let me it's the 60s, San Francisco. And again, we'll give it a few seconds, and if not, I thought it was interesting to be able to share. And it'll be one of those things of as you kind of walk by the Gap in any mall, you're going to think to yourself, you can ask your friends, hey, do you know what the Gap stands for?
Okay, I got a couple comments now.
Sure.
Gap in the market.
Okay, that could, could be.
Another one, fill the space. Gap between what was wanted and what is out there.
Okay.
Classes and money-wise.
Okay.
Gap in prices. So.
Yep, could be. So those are all totally logical and normal guesses. So the Gap actually refers to the generation gap that they were seeing at that time. In terms, so remember, the 60s was a big cultural difference in terms of, especially in San Francisco, there were a lot of protests, there was a lot of, youth mobility in terms of youth talking about rights, talking about there are a lot of cultural discussions, I should say, in terms of the
Right.
younger generation versus the older generation. And so the gap was referring to the generation gap, thinking their customers wanted a place that they can find their own things. So that it was really catering to that younger customer because the traditional stores weren't catering to them. So it's a good reminder in terms of, like I said, that, and we're going to see that now. And as we move through the discussion, I think it'll come back in terms of why this becomes even more important. So with that said, why don't we move on to some of the more kind of current topics about the Gap. So you can see then in terms of, they started as one little store, right? A hobby, you can say a passion project. They just thought, okay, well, why don't we try this out and serve this younger generation? So 1969, the first Gap store opens. Then about 8 years later, the company goes public. So it's pretty still, it's still pretty young, and only with one company. And let me kind of pause here. The Fisher family, they're billionaires. So they are no longer involved in the company, but they still own quite a bit. Actually, I started my career there. I worked for the Gap in the 90s, but more on the executive side. So I did international business development and Gap Online business development, and I actually worked with one of the sons. He was in charge of the international division, and you can tell he thinks like an owner. And it was very rewarding to work with somebody like that who had much more long-term mentality versus maybe some other leaders. And you can tell the buck stopped with him. So it was quite interesting observation in terms of how owners think versus how managers think. So it was a great way to kind of start my business career, kind of at that level. So it was really cool to see that. But like I said, I'll tell you when I worked there in terms of in this timeline. So the company goes public, only one company or one brand, The Gap. Then in 1983, so quite a few years later, they acquired Banana Republic. At that point, Banana Republic was kind of a safari-oriented store in terms of they did like a lot of khakis, mostly for outdoorsy type of things, and then they turned it into more kind of workwear. Then in '86, they opened up their first Gap Kids store, and how that started is the CEO at that time couldn't find cute kids wear. And he saw kind of a gap in the market, to paraphrase some of our earlier comments. And they thought, well, wouldn't it be cute if we just kind of shrunk the adult clothes into little people's clothes? So that was really how they started, and then kind of Baby Gap followed from there. So then in the 90s, so 94 is when Old Navy started. And let me kind of share a little bit of kind of inside thoughts of how Old Navy started. Old Navy started because at that point in the mid-90s, what they were seeing is a lot of people were buying clothes at Target and at these what people traditionally called discount stores. But Target did a really good job of focusing on design and making really cool clothes. And a lot of people were leaving the Gap and Banana Republic and shopping at Target. But remember, Target is not at the mall. In terms of what we consider traditional malls, they're called big box retailers, and they're in a different kind of location in our neighborhoods. And the Gap and Banana Republic are primary mall driven. So the leaders of the Gap thought, well, we need to be where the consumer is, and we need to be where the consumer is buying, which is the Targets of the world. So then they thought, okay, well, let's use all of our brain power, create the same type of clothes, maybe the same look, but let's make it more fun, and let's make it something that will compete with Target. So that's really how kind of Old Navy came into play. And then, but then, like I said, it's a combination of a different real estate strategy to be more near the big box retailers, and to be like in the beginning, they wanted to be wherever Target was. They were that deliberate because that's where the consumer was. So that that became obviously a huge billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar business. And then you can see there wasn't a lot of activity from 94 to 2008. I worked there from 97 through 99. So kind of the height of Old Navy and whatnot. So, and then lately they've been acquiring a couple of other brands called Athleta and Intermix. Athleta is basically, athletic wear, workout wear, and Intermix is mostly kind of designer, women's designer clothing. It was a chain in New York that they bought. So you can see then in terms of its apparel, its retailing, and it's a mix of brands that they've developed in-house, right? Old Navy is something that they developed in-house. Gap Kids is something that they developed in-house, and then mixed with brands that they've acquired from, other entrepreneurs or other owners. So today, this is what, the entire Gap Inc. looks like. So before we move on, any comments, questions, observations?
Yeah, I have an interesting question from Lindsay. What's the biggest difference for you between being a manager and owner of your own business? You have any thoughts on that?
Yep, I think it's, that's a great comment, and let me just take a moment here to kind of share my experiences. I think the owners think more long-term, and they think about people. For example, there was a big project that I had to do, and afterwards, after my presentation, I got a handwritten note from the owner. My boss was an employee, right? My immediate boss. The founder's son was my 3 levels up, my boss's boss's boss. The other 2 in between didn't get a note, didn't get anything, right? That's just, there's a different level of appreciation. There is there's a different level of energy. So I feel like at least this is my experience, so obviously everybody's is different, but I felt like it was much more people and business. It wasn't just business. And obviously I think that goes to, employees can think like owners too. And then not all owners think like owners. So I think it's really luck of the draw in terms of how many people have these combinations. But I do think in terms of it is long term. Yeah, okay, we may lose out a little bit, but we have a 5-year horizon, not a 3-month horizon. And so that's what I mean by, and if you think about it, they've been around for 47 years, right? And did they set out to do this? Probably not. Back in 1969, if you asked the couple who have passed away, and now it's just they have 3 sons who are still owners. Do they think it's going to create this multi-billion-dollar, company? Probably not. They just did the right things and moved along and grew it every time, but every decision had a much more long-term orientation.
Okay.
So as we kind of get your comments, maybe we should move to the next slide so we can talk more kind of about your experiences generally, and then we can pause here for a lot of different comments and whatnot. So, for example, have you shopped at one of their stores? What do you like about it? Who are its competitors? What do you think it does well? What do you think it doesn't do well? And we're going to talk a lot about these kind of in our time today, but let's just take a moment and get your thoughts first.
Okay, we've got a couple here.
Mm-hmm.
I think what they're saying is continue to learn. Continue to learn. We must grow and be willing to work together, or that multiple contrast. I'm not quite sure there on that one. Let me see here. I have one. Let me just. Okay, I have one here from Stephania, I believe. Wait a minute. I'm a designer, and my observations in the fashion industry. Oops. It keeps moving on me. Everybody's posting now. Hold on a moment. Let me just get back here for a second. Here we go. I'm a designer. Okay, she works in the fashion industry. What the consumer wants today, particularly millennials, is special, not generic. They don't buy into the whole corporate thing, but they want to have special relationships with the brands. They want cooperation, they want engagement, and they want a story. The Gap doesn't provide any of these elements. So there's one comment on it. Let's see. Here's another comment with the Gap. I see a lot of West Coast styles, even in the East Coast. Let's see. And I think those are the only ones so far
Okay.
here. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's actually a couple of good observations in terms of we'll touch upon kind of these comments, but I think for kind of our initial part of our discussion, they're really good, and I think that's exactly spot on. So as part of that, Russell, can we go back to slide 6?
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
Right. It somehow
Yeah.
got. Okay,
Yeah,
I didn't realize it clicked. Yeah. Okay.
No problem. So before we talk about the Gap, we also need to talk about kind of the larger environment of apparel. And so, but I think this is very important because this is how this affects the Gap so much. If Gap was the only apparel store, that's a different story, right? But obviously we as consumers have so many more choices than ever before. If anything, we have too many choices. And this is, I think, why Gap, and in the comments earlier in terms of, how can they keep, being the top that they once were, and be cool again. So Gap is, so to really understand Gap, we have to really look at Zara. And Zara, for those of you who may not be familiar, and there may be enough people today who have shopped at Zara or are familiar with Zara or have seen Zara in kind of the malls. Zara is a Spanish company. It's owned by this company called Inditex, and really just as kind of Gap revolutionized traditional retail, the Gap was called a specialty retailer because they just focused on one type of apparel, and specialty retail for Gap kids. Like, they really kind of invented that concept of specialty retail. So Gap was revolutionary in kind of the 70s and 80s and maybe even in the 90s. And then you can see kind of in this chart, they started to get some competition. And when I was working there, they definitely did not take Zara seriously. So you can kind of see, I had to kind of benchmark Zara. And it's funny that then, kind of working on that then would lead to Zara where it is today. It's quite remarkable. But Zara then revolutionized fashion and retail in a different way, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So right now, Zara is the world's largest apparel retailer. And so a company that was started much later is worth 10 times the value of the Gap in such a short amount of time. And so this chart kind of says it all in terms of the Gap seemed kind of steady, right, for many years. And look at kind of Zara keeps going and going and going higher and higher and higher in terms of the value. And incidentally, or I should say not coincidentally, Zara's founder is the second richest person in the world, second only to Bill Gates. And in some cases, when the Microsoft stock drops, the Zara founder sometimes is ranked #1 in terms of the wealth that he's generated for himself. So here's this behemoth, this gigantic company, Zara, and started much later than the Gap, but it's really kind of making Gap kind of wake up and figure itself out. And to kind of just give you a glimpse, first of all, how many people have shopped at Zara? And if you've shopped at Zara and the Gap, kind of if somebody can compare and contrast kind of what the shopping experiences are like, or even some of the products, like what do you think are kind of, why do you like shopping at either one or neither?
Okay, I don't see any posts yet. I do see a couple more comments on the Gap. Some comments that they appeal to everyday working class, that they seem to kind of have lost that appeal for something special. Another comment that they're missing certain sizes. So those are a couple more comments that I saw. Gap is generic. Zara is always in trend.
Yep.
Gap is very expensive. I don't think we have too many people that are familiar with Zara. So
Okay.
so far
Well,
anyway.
we'll talk. Yep, we'll talk about then Zara in a second, and maybe next time you see it, just go in. You don't need to buy anything, but just kind of observe, like if you see it in the mall, if you see it somewhere that you or go check out the website in terms of it's good business research for you, but don't buy anything. We're not encouraging shopping at this point. We're just encouraging research. So let's talk about Zara. So Zara, what they do is they're very data driven. They know exactly what style sells. So if there are 10 types of sweaters, they know that this one particular type of sweater sells out the most. So what do? They make more of the one that sells. And then and that's how they've been growing. So they'll put a few styles out, and then they'll let customers kind of buy and kind of decide which one's more popular by buying, right? If you have an option of three sweaters, and you and 1,000 other customers like the same one, well, they know which sweater is a hit, and they'll make that many more at the next batch. But so their time to market is so fast compared to the Gap. So what the Gap has to do, they have to design a sweater, then maybe it makes a prototype and everything, send it offshore, wait, so they have to decide what their merchandise is maybe 3 to 6 to 9 months in advance, maybe even longer. And then they make it offshore, then it takes forever to come in, and then they put it in the store. So we're talking months here in terms of lead time. And so therefore, whereas, when somebody says Zara is on trend, well, let's say tomorrow, vests are the biggest thing, right? So then so let's take an example. So this was in the Wall Street Journal recently. So for Zara, it takes 25 days to take a garment from concept to in the store. So the Gap, it may be lucky if it has 6 months. So right then and there, it can respond to trends so much faster. So let's say if the vest, or in this case a coat, is the big hit, right, a blogger wrote about it, Vogue wrote about it, some celebrity, was wearing this particular vest, and then everybody had to have it. So Zara can get it to market in less than a month. Whereas the Gap, it's probably going to be the minimum would probably be 3 to 6 months, just from everything just takes that long. So here's some kind of a pictorial. So day one, the designer will sketch out a coat, right, in terms of this is what it should look like and whatnot. Then within a few days, they can create a prototype of what it's going to look like, kind of the weight of it, the fabric, the overall look and feel. So within 5 days, they have a product, right? They have a product ready to go, ready to be manufactured. So let's move to the next slide. So then kind of as the second week moves in, so in over a couple of days, then the fabric is cut. They have these gigantic industrial cutting machines where they can probably cut like 10 layers of cloth at once, right? If they have 10 layers of fabric, and I'm just being conservative, it could probably even cut more than that. So they're cutting like 10 pairs of pants at once, or in this case, 10 coats at once. So fabric is cut, and then in a matter of a week, because their factory is all in Spain and everything is done out of Spain, they are able to sew 8,000 coats in a week, just like that, because that's their priority now. And so within 17 days, they have created their inventory. That is quite remarkable. There are very, very few companies, if any, that can produce at that level and be responsive to consumer trends. Because as we all know, in fashion, or apparel is fashion, and as somebody said, the Gap is kind of boring. Even I was so loyal to the Gap for so many years, even I don't buy at the Gap as much anymore, because it's like, well, it feels so out of date. It feels the same thing every time you go in. Whereas Zara, every time you go in, there's something new, there's something current and everything like that. So it's which is why I would encourage you to either go to the Zara website or to go walk through the stores just to check it out for yourself. I think you'll find kind of the personalities of these two stores very different.
Yeah, Just a couple comments on Zara
Sure.
from students. One indicating that clothes are comfortable. Another one indicating it's the biggest store in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Someone in Italy who says he shops there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And someone else who also indicates that they have just-in-time jewelry, and I guess the
Yep.
employees use a what the heck happened there? There we go. They have just-in-time jewelry, and I guess the employees have um, uh, yeah handheld computers.
Yeah, it's very
To
technologically driven in terms of they can tell you,
right.
even on the Zara website, let's say you like this one shirt, they'll show you what your local store has, what sizes it comes in, and if your local store has it. And if not, then you can order it online, or if there are any stores. So they use technology for their benefit. They know how to use technology, whereas the Gap is still learning. So here's a newer entrant to the market that put the Gap in on a defensive play, right? They've been very aggressive in how they've done anything, but it's not like they're being they're beating the Gap at their own game. So going back to kind of this coat manufacturing. So by day 21, the coats have been developed, sewn. Now they're ready to be shipped, right? They're ironed, they're labeled, they're all kind of getting ready to be shipped out. So and then over the next couple of days, they're all prepared for shipments to go to Zara stores around the world. So everything's kind of done centrally in Spain. They have, it's like a command headquarters. There's monitors everywhere. They know exactly kind of what's their biggest seller every day, probably by the hour. So they slice and dice data every which way, and then they produce more of it. So it's like if there's a hit, then they produce more, and if that sells out, they'll probably produce more, and then it's probably time to move on to the next season. But that's whereas the Gap, they have to commit to X thousand of shirts well in advance without knowing what the consumer likes or not. They're guessing what the consumer wants, whereas Zara is responding to what consumer wants. And now with technology, the company that is more responsive is probably going to be the one who's more successful. And so, yes, everything all the comments have been great. They're exactly spot on. But in terms of one of the things that we're going to talk about is, do you think the Gap can copy Zara now? Right? Zara is the one who kind of copied the Gap. Do you think the Gap can kind of copy Zara, and do you think it should? So if we look at the stock price, this is from the beginning of 2015 till now. For the Gap, if you're an investor, it's not so good of a time, right? Like there have been better days beforehand. So, but at the same time, it's not tiny, right? They have a lot of stores. They have a lot of assets. What do you think? Where does it go from here? What would you tell them? How do you think about it in terms of, can the Gap regain its previous strength? Do you think it should? Do you think do you think it's worth buying the stock? So, let's open it up for discussion.
Well, I have one comment here. No, I feel Gap is a family-oriented store and has been for a very long time. Another comment here. I think all business should take a note from Zara and make it work for their business. And those are the main comments at the moment.
Okay.
We're starting to see a few. Well, why don't you continue? I'll make some notes here, and we can go over them then.
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of one of the challenges that the Gap faces is it goes back to kind of I think if the family's sons or the kind of the founder's sons still work there, I often wonder, would it be in the same situation it is now? the Suns no longer, they own it, right? They own shares and they own, financially they own it. But in terms of, they don't manage the company as much. They're off doing their other things. So I often wonder what the Gap would look like if the Suns were still involved. And I wish, and to be honest, I wish they were, because here's an American icon, right? The Gap. And it's nowhere near kind of where it used to be, but I think in terms of, they don't invest in the clothes. And for a while, they brought in a CEO who, he cut a lot of costs and he made the company way more efficient. But he came from a drugstore background, and he never focused on the product. He does not come as, in terms of, he doesn't understand design, he doesn't understand apparel. He ran the Gap like you would a drugstore. So a CVS, a Walgreens, Rite Aid, these are all common drugstore chains in the U.S. Or like in the U.K., Boots and kind of, all that. So imagine, and I think that was the big difference. And I personally feel that, if you're going to be CEO of an apparel company, you should understand apparel. If you are going to be a CEO of a car company, you should understand cars. And the CEO that they brought in understood retail, but not necessarily apparel. And I think that was their biggest mistake. He did some good things, but I think in terms of, you can see then that's where things started to not be so design-driven. And when I say design-driven, like cool clothes that you'd want to wear, or clothes that last. I think I think it's going to be really hard for the Gap to kind of get back to where it was without a really strong visionary again. That's just my 2 cents. I think it can still happen, but now it really depends on who's in charge at the top.
Yeah, we have a couple comments. Actually, a couple people have talked about the in-store experience and improving the in-store experience. There are a couple people who talked about the new management team, so I think they're thinking right. Another one that they should focus on the values that got Gap to where it is, or where it was.
That is absolutely correct. You hit it right on the head.
Yeah, they seem to have gotten away from that a little bit. And another one, to take pointers from Zara. As far as their distribution and supply chain. Let's see.
These are great comments. These are spot on.
Yeah, I think they're all kind of similar.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really good. So yeah, the in-store experience, so they actually, so when this one particular CEO was in charge, they cut down the number of salespeople at the store. So it was almost like a checkout, right? That goes back to the drugstore mentality, right? And so that's, it was sad when that happened, and now they're kind of reinvesting back in the stores in terms of a few more employees kind of per store. But that was, like I said, if you want to grow, you don't cut to grow. Yes, you should take out the fat in the company, but taking out fat doesn't mean, like, a consumer, if he has a question about a shirt or a pair of pants, like, who does he answer? Well, you might as well just buy online, right? Like, in terms of, so they didn't, I don't think they understood, like, what they had and what made them the Gap. In some ways, maybe their success came easy and they didn't really quite understand as they passed it along to kind of a new management team. But, with all this kind of said, it's more of, it's going to be hard to right the ship. So yeah, so in terms of, I think these are all good recommendations, correct the product, address the in-store experience, new management team. These are all, and then obviously kind of change their supply chain and distribution around. So I think in terms of, these are all very, very kind of spot on. if you think about it, why don't we go to the next slide to kind of, talk about each one of the concepts more broadly. So we've kind of packed in a lot of different concepts without even knowing it, which is, what I like to do. So in terms of, let's kind of use this as a checklist of some of the topics that we talked about and trying to bring it back to your Intro to Business course. One of the things that you can see then with the Gap is the make versus buy decision, right? They made a couple of their own brands and then they bought a couple of their own brands. And who knows what brands they want to buy next, or it'll be interesting kind of, or even keep. So they, in terms of Banana Republic, a brand that they bought, so Banana Republic was very U.S. based for a long time, and then I think their first international country was Canada. And then they moved into a couple of other countries. So just in the last, I think, 3 to 6 months, the Gap announced that they're going to close all Banana Republic stores in the UK. So you can see now that in terms of they're trying to right the ship, and I bet they did that because they're probably having losses in that country. If you don't have a compelling enough product, as one of our participants said, then if people aren't going to buy, well, why are you still in these countries where they have Zara and Zara's kicking their butt, along with other kind of brands? Russell, did you have something, or should I continue?
Yeah, no, I have a couple here.
Sure.
One of them was about Banana Republic being part of Gap. How is that managed differently, a separate management team, because it seems to have a different feel to it than some of the other Gap.
Yep, yeah, that's exactly right. There's a separate management team for each brand, different president, different finance, different design, different everything. So let me step back. So how the Gap kind of organized Banana Republic, Gap, and Old Navy in the beginning is it was called the good, better, best strategy. Old Navy is the good, Gap is better, and Banana Republic is the best. And both in terms of maybe design, more kind of forward-looking, fashion forward, prices, could be the quality. But so that was the way it was in the mid-90s. So I think now a part of the problem is there isn't that much of a difference between Old Navy and the Gap, or the Gap and Banana Republic. And before, it was very clear from a product perspective of this could be a $10 t-shirt at Old Navy, and then maybe a $20 t-shirt at the Gap, and maybe a $30 t-shirt at Banana Republic, and you can feel the difference. Now, there probably isn't that much of a difference in the t-shirt vis-a-vis the price. So that's where you need people who understand apparel to come up with these differences and to develop products according to the brand. So that's one thing. So yeah, so all these brands are managed differently. So they're managed like mini little companies.
Yeah, I have another comment. It's referring to the problems that Gap has had. It's always because they failed to understand wait a minute. They failed to understand that workloads don't work anymore as the work environment has changed. They did not adapt to the changing society.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And taste levels. Zara can produce it cheaper, faster, better. And when you have a competitor like that, you really have to figure out what you stand for. And yeah, so I think I hope there's a lot of soul searching over at the executive ranks at the Gap. So then kind of coming back to our little checklist of concepts that we talked about today, innovation, right? Like in terms of Zara is using their supply chain as innovation. So they're making products that the consumer really wants, and therefore that cuts down on a lot of waste. That cuts down on markdowns, sale items. You're going to buy it because you like it. They let the market dictate versus at the Gap they let the designers dictate, which has a place, but the Gap is not doing it well. I'm talking about this is what the Gap used to do. Now I'm not sure kind of how they develop their products. So market valuation. So we said the market valuation Zara has Zara's market valuation is 10 times that of the Gap. So, that's how much the market, stock market investors, the financial community really values Zara. And it must be humbling for those people at the Gap to think that they were part of a company, at the height of it, that they pretty much ruled specialty retail and apparel retail, and now they're playing catch up in a very big way. Leadership, we talked a little bit about kind of, leadership of owners versus managers, kind of that mentality, as well as then, I called me old-fashioned, but apparel, and a CEO of an apparel company should have apparel experience. CEO of a car company should have car experience. CEO of a bank should understand financial markets and kind of the banking system. Obviously, you could learn certain things, but at least an exposure and affinity and whatnot. And you can see in terms of, I think, it's one thing to say, oh, well, if you're smart, people can figure out anything. I agree, but then there's just a whole kind of philosophy that you may be missing. So I think that was kind of, an important kind of distinction. Supply chain we talked about. It's interesting that Zara has, they keep everything close, so that way the designer can literally walk to the factory to see where the apparel is made, as opposed to the Gap. They probably have, middlemen. I know when I was working there, they had a big office in Hong Kong to then manage the factories in China. So that requires a lot of coordination. You are many steps removed from the designers to the actual factory. You may not even know the factory if you're the designer, whereas the Zara has everything close by. That's why they can produce a coat and ship it to the U.S. in 25 days. That is literally unheard of. But they do it. They do it all the time. Competitive advantage, yeah. In terms of, you can argue that the Gap has a competitive advantage in terms of history and branding and Americana, and Zara has a competitive advantage in supply chain, logistics, and product development, right? Like from time to market. Global sales and growth. Zara is dominating the world. A participant talked about that they buy it in Italy. It's and in Europe, and they've only entered the U.S. probably maybe 10 maximum, maybe 10, 15 years ago. I would say it's probably more like 10 years ago. And so in such a short amount of time, they're in a lot of malls across the country. And then growth strategy. I think that and it's also interesting to as an observer, Zara has one company, Zara. They're not buying these companies. They're not trying to do all these other brands. There's no like Zara Light, there's no Old Navy version of Zara. There's no Banana Republic version of Zara. It's just Zara. Whereas the Gap's focus on 3 brands, probably in the beginning, if you had when they had a strong design team, they can keep them separate. But if you're not going to have a strong design team, they might as well just collapse them all into one brand. And that's going to be harder, and that might help them grow versus right now, why not? If you don't know what Banana Republic stands for and the quality, and if you can't see the quality, you're going to buy at the Gap. And if you can't see the quality at the Gap, you should buy at Old Navy. It's the cheapest. And so that's what I'm saying in terms of, I wouldn't be surprised if we did a blind test of 3 T-shirts across these 3 brands, we probably won't see that much of a difference. That's just my guess. But I encourage you to do your own tests in terms of next time you're in the mall shopping for holiday presents and whatever, you can see it for yourself and see if it's worth for the Gap to kind of keep all 3 companies under the same house, or what it should do. So I think today was a really good discussion. I very much value all of your feedback, and I encourage you to do a little bit of market research on your own. Luckily, these are companies that we're all familiar with and probably close by in terms of over the next few months when you're out and about, to check it out for yourselves and really wonder kind of why they made certain decisions that they've made, and has it helped them or has it hurt them? So I think the clothes on the shelves will tell us exactly kind of how they've made certain decisions. So that's a mouthful. Let's take a pause and kind of and see if there are any other comments and questions that may have come in.
Well, I don't have too many comments at the moment. I myself have a comment. I used to work in the
Yeah.
retail field in the 1980s, the 1980s. I'm dating myself now, but one of the things that we had to deal with back then was the fact that you had to wait. You had to plan your selections, 6 months in advance and wait for it to come by boat to Los Angeles from the
That's right.
Pacific. And,
Yeah.
and if there was a dock strike in Los Angeles, you had problems getting your stock to market. I mean, the fact that Zara has the ability to, turn on a dime basically within less than a month and get product to stores is a huge advantage in that, they can see what's happening in the market and just like turn on a dime. And
Yeah.
we couldn't do things like that back then, and it's because of the technology that we have now.
That's right. But so think about it. Even with email, even with the internet, you would think the companies would revamp it. But I think, so you hit it right on that. It's really hard to change legacy systems like that. And I think that's where where Zara didn't have legacy systems. They just started this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of they didn't have a 6-month lead time schedule that somebody said, we need to shrink it down to 25 days. I bet what their previous turnaround was probably like 30 days, and then 30 to 40 days that they probably shrunk down to 25 in
Right.
terms of with efficiencies, with better execution, with ideas and creativity. So that is manageable. 6 months to 25 days, unless you just say we're never going to use those factories again. And San Francisco, or the Gap being in San Francisco, we're going to open up a factory in San Francisco. It would be hard to, and that's a lot of money that how can they justify to their investors saying, we're going to scrap everything we've done for 47 years and we're going to, start a new factory in San Francisco, and we're going to be, doing the Zara way, our way.
Right.
That's really hard to sell to kind of your employees and investors.
Okay. Are there any questions out there at this point? Oh, here's a good one. Zara
Yeah.
product, is it the same price range as Gap?
I believe it's cheaper.
Okay. Let's see here.
They're also trendier, so it's really hard to compare. Kind of, it's a little bit of apples and oranges. It's more kind of fashion forward, and I do believe it's cheaper. It's definitely cheaper in Europe. Here, it's probably still priced cheaper than the Gap. I have a strong feeling.
Okay. All right. I don't see any more questions. That was the last slide, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I just had to make sure here. Okay, well, I guess we'll wrap this
And
up.
I wanted to talk,
Yep.
and I wanted to talk real fast so we can get under,
okay.
We have 3 minutes to spare for everybody's time today.
Well, I can patiently wait 3 minutes if everybody wants, if there are any other thoughts. I know I do have one here. I have to get that one in because I know she's asked it a couple times here. What happens to all the products they don't sell? How do they handle that? Do they just do clearance, or do they?
Yeah, usually they do clearance, and Zara. So I think the clearance cycle, the sales cycle for the Gap is monthly. So that's why, in terms of the biggest joke is, oh, if you like something at the Gap, just wait a month and it'll go on sale. Zara, their sales cycle is a little bit longer because they don't need to put stuff on sale as frequently, because they only, they have these complex mathematical models of saying, oh, over the last 3 months we sold, 1,000 pairs of pants. Well, that's how much we should produce because that's how much we expect to sell. So they're only producing what the market can handle. So there isn't that much excess inventory to put on sale. Whereas the Gap, one of the first things that a lot of people do when they go to the Gap is they go straight to the sale rack because they've been conditioned to buy on sale. So yeah, they mostly put them on sale. If they don't sell, yeah, not sure. I don't know kind of what they do, but there's a lot of waste in kind of in that traditional model.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give the last question here. Let me see. GAP used to stand for the younger generation 50 years ago. Does it still stand for that today? For youth today, I'm sorry.
Good question. I would guess not. Maybe you can buy some good jeans and some basics, but I bet the younger generation shops at a lot more of a variety of stores. And I think it goes back to some of the initial comment made by the participant who's a designer in terms of, the younger generation, they need to feel good about what they're buying, right? Millennials need the story. They need to, so the Gap hasn't, I don't know how much they resonate with the millennials today. So, I'm sure they've done studies about that, but I don't know. I don't think they're capturing that market as well as they probably could, and probably as well as other concepts.
Okay. One last question here. I know I said
Yes.
that was the last question, but one more.
It's okay.
This is a good one. They're asking your opinion here. Can Gap change? Do you think that Gap can change their way and compete with Zara effectively? Tough one.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not that it's tough. I don't think they could with their current management team, and I don't think their current management team is going anywhere. I think that's the problem.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if they think I don't think they're doing a good enough job. Will they ever meet Zara? No. Can they be a better Gap? Absolutely. So that's the thing in terms of, do they need to be like Zara? No. There are a lot of other successful apparel companies that aren't Zara. But the Gap is kind of in this neverland in between. They're not Zara. They're not the Gap, right? They've kind of lost their own luster. So I feel like they're kind of having an identity crisis.
Okay. All right. That's the final word. So I just want to let everybody know within 24 hours you're going to get an email from me with a link to a quick survey. It's 3 questions. Just want to get your feel for it so we can, when we're planning our next one, we can look at what all you guys thought about our webinar. And so if you could just take a few moments and fill it out, it should take you 30 seconds, no more than that. Tell us what you think of the presentation and any ideas for other topics. As I indicated at the beginning, this is also a recorded interview or a webinar, so it's going to be posted on the community. You probably should see it in the business area of the community either tomorrow or Thursday. And I'd like to thank Debbie for taking time to do this webinar, and I think it was pretty interesting, and we got a lot of great feedback here, and I hope you all learned something, and I want to thank everybody and have a great evening.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye.